up you phonies, how's it going? Welcome to another Blender tutorial. Today we're gonna do something super cool where my friend Aramis is gonna lift a bunch of cars with telekinesis. Very similar to my scene I've done before with myself in a green screen, but in that case I generated the entire environment. Everything was in CG besides myself. I was green screen. In this video I'm gonna use a real environment, real footage, and just add the cars and add the particles and add all those things I want to lift up from the ground. In this video I'm going to show you how to do that in Blender, and in the next video, part 2, I'm going to show you how composited all that in After Effects. But first we need to go out and get the footage. So I called my friend Aramis, he's down, and let's go. So we were driving around a little to find an empty parking spot. It's not empty over here, as you can see, but it's empty over there. So that's perfect, so I can place all the 3D cars in the background without having actual real cars, so which would mess up the effect. So, but the problem is, I just dropped my camera with my lens. Like, it's all busted up. And it's like $6,000 gear here in my hands, which is just messed up right now. So if you feel like donating on my PayPal link, the link is down below. I'm very frustrated right now. But luckily we have Aramis here with his camera, so we can still record the video. So let's get this going. So the idea is that Aramis is going to be standing here, lift his arms like this, and then we're going to have all kinds of CG cars in the background lifting up. Maybe some particles too, which is going to sell the effect even better. And I just have to be aware of where the sun is right now, because the sun is over there. So I need like those shadow references so I can align the real shadows with the CG shadows, which is an important one. Also, I'm not going to use any green screen here. That means that I have to rotoscope my friend Aramis frame by frame with his movement. And to keep that in mind, you don't want him to spread his fingers, because it's very hard to rotoscope fingers separately. So he's going to keep his fingers together. And also it's great if he has a different color than the background. So he's wearing all black right now. We have a pretty bright street, sunlit, so that should work out. And the last and maybe most important thing is, make sure you have enough tracking points in your shot. Right now we have dirt over there. I'm going to move it a little closer, so I have points on my street I can track, because it's going to be a moving camera shot. If it wasn't a tripod, that wouldn't matter, but I'm going to place a few objects here. And now let's just get this shot done, and then see you back in my studio. Woo! Action. All right, we got the footage, and as you could see, I destroyed my most precious lens. I hate it. Just this lens is like $3 grand, a little more. This hurts. So if you really want to support this channel and help me out to get another lens, PayPal link is in the description. But that sucks. Good thing I have one spare lens I can use to record those videos. So let's go. So we have our footage. Now it's time to get it into Blender. When you look at my Blender scene, this is what it looks like when I start my Blender. I have a camera and my little Mihao, usually as a reference model for scale, because he's exactly 1.83 meters. So I kind of have an idea how big my scene has to be, where my object is going to be, where my protagonist is going to be. So I can set it all up with my little Mihao here as a reference, also for light and shadows, which is also very helpful, but you're gonna see that in a second. The first thing we need to do is import our footage, import our video, and track it. For that, up here in Blender, I have my motion tracking tab. If you don't have it up here, hit on plus, VFX, motion tracking. Then it's gonna pop up here. When you click on it, I open my video file. This is my video. I don't have to pre-edit this because I shot it at exactly the right time I wanted it to be. So the first thing I do is I set scene frames. So now my project is exactly the right length. And also I'm gonna prefetch. So it's gonna pre-render my video into my RAM, so then it's gonna be watchable fluently and without any lag. Now, I'm gonna go to my color management and change it to raw, so I can see a little better my contrast points, what and how can I track in my shot. So when I go through it, I want to make sure that the tracking points I use are going to be in my shot through the entire shot. So if I picked something down here, it would disappear throughout the shot, and I don't want this. So I'm going to pick tracking points somewhere where they're going to be visible throughout the entire scene. So I'm going to go on my first frame. The first thing I'm going to pick is my tracking setting, and I'm going to go on blurry footage. Usually works best. I hit normalize, make sure location is selected. And now I always like to detect features, and I get lots of tracking points here, way too many. So I don't need that many, especially the ones on my character I don't need. So I'm going to just select those and delete them, because obviously I want to track my camera and not my characters. So I'm going to delete all the tracking markers on my person. In the end, we need 8 good tracks. So right now I have hundreds. We don't need that many. Mostly the ones here in the background are important. So I'm just going to hit B and select all the ones on the ground. I don't need any of them because they're going to disappear out of the shot eventually. When I look at my last frame, the camera goes up to his hip. So anything underneath the hip, I'm just going to delete. Hit B again. This is like the hip. I'm going to delete all of these. Now I'm going to hit A and track forward. You can already see this one is freaking out. I'm definitely going to delete that one. Tracking your environment like that is always tricky, but sometimes it does a good job. So now I'm going to delete the trackers which are no good, like this one. This one in the background is also doing funny things, so I'm just going to delete that one too. I'm just going to delete the tracks which don't seem to align with all the other lines here in my graph editor. We still have more than 8, so we should be good. I'm just going to delete a bunch until I think I have a clean track. See, this one is not doing what the other ones do, so I'm going to delete this one and this one. And right now it looks good. So when you think you did a good job, go to Solve, hit Keyframe, Focal Length, and Optical Center, and let's hope for the best and solve camera motion. The more trackers you have, the longer the tracking is going to take, especially the solving process is going to take longer. If you have a slower computer and you just want to get through this process faster, I would suggest set your own trackers, like 10 at the most, and then it's not going to take that long. The goal here is to get a solve error of less than 1 pixel. Right now it's 0.72, which is great. The scene is definitely going to work like that. If you wanted to get it even lower, try to look deeper which of those tracks are not doing what they're supposed to do, and then delete those and solve it again. But right now it does seem fine. One thing to keep in mind is you definitely want to have trackers on your ground, because you have to select your ground separately, and I'm going to do that in a second. So make sure to have trackers on your ground so you can tell Blender, hey, this is my ground. Okay. And also preferably you have your origin here. That you have a tracker where your main subject is standing. It's not super important, but it's good to know. But anyways, so far the track looks good. So what we're going to do is we're going to set as background. We're going to set this video as the background and also set up tracking scene. Now you can see on the upper view layer, when we hit 0, we are in our camera view. And when we look through our video, already you can see the camera is moving, the CG camera is moving the way the real camera is moving. But obviously the origin and the directions, all that is off. So in order to set that up, all we need to do is set our origin, which is, like I said, a problem here because we don't really have anything in the origin. But let's say back here, this is our origin. Set origin. Now this guy is standing back here because that's the origin. And now I'm going to select 3 trackers which are on the ground. Hold shift and select 3 trackers and hit floor. Now we can see that our plane here is aligned. I can scale my plane up, rotate it around the Z axis, and we're going to see if it's still moving properly. It does look good. Now what I can do is, this was our origin, and select this one, and that's going to be our X axis. That way left and right is going to be X, into the distance is going to be the Y axis, and up and down as usual is our Z axis. And that's great. Now we're going to go back to our layout. We can always come back here and adjust things. But when we look here through our camera, here we're looking through our camera, here we can just see the camera, the way it's moving. Or we can just adjust our origin point manually. Just make sure to not move anything up and down. So for that I hold shift and click Z and bring this closer to our camera so it's somewhere where our guy is. I can rotate him in the same direction, What I didn't do is to adjust the scale. So I'm just going to try to bring it in the right position, because to adjust the scale, that's a tricky one. You usually should measure your real set and have a point exactly 1 meter, for example, and then in your motion tracking, you can set your scale. So I'm going to pick 2 markers with shift selected, and when I set scale, it should make this exactly 1 meter. I don't know if that's exactly 1 meter. It's probably more. So when I go a little higher, that could be like 1 meter now. I go back to my layout, bring my Miho back to where he belongs. That's a little closer to what it has to be. But I know my little Miho is a little taller than Aramis, but not that much taller. So I'm just gonna go back to my motion tracking tab and make those 2 points I selected before 2.4. Set scale. Let's bring him back to the right position, which also is like a guessing game, but that is very close. Why it's so important to have that properly, or as properly as possible, is because if you add all those models like cars or vehicles or trash, all this was modeled by scale. Everything has the right scale. If I mess up this part, all those cars and vehicles I'm going to import are either going to be too small or too big, and you can't see it later. So make sure to spend enough time on that to adjust your scale properly. Now my little Miho here is going to be important, because I'm going to move him a little to the right so they're going to be standing next to each other. So when I set my lighting, I can have the shadow align with this shadow. That's going to set the lighting for the entire scene. So let me show you. Right now we have a background layer we don't really want. We're going to make a few separate collections later, but for now we put everything in the foreground. We're going to delete the light. We don't want any light. Delete the background collection. Now our ground should be automatically set as a shadow catcher. So we go to visibility and shadow catcher selected. So when I render this, let's go to cycles real quick. That's what I will get out of cycles. Right now it's completely black because I don't have any light, but I wouldn't see my ground. It's just catching shadows. Switch back to Eevee so we can work faster. Okay, now I'm gonna go back to my color management, go back to filmic on that one. So when I render it, I get like a not very contrasty look, but also not log, because that wasn't shot in log. So I can adjust the lighting as good as possible. Now let's set our light. Usually what I like to do is like having an HDRI light which is overcast, just for general reflections and stuff like that. But most importantly, I'm gonna set my sunlight manually. So when I hit Shift A, I'm gonna go to light and make a sunlight. My sunlight is right here at the origin. I'm gonna bring it. Not that the position matters, the position doesn't matter at all where the sunlight is, because the sunlight is parallel. When I go to my Eevee settings and go on scene lights, it should show me also the light in my scene. So I can see my shadow here on the ground. I could do that in cycles too. I used to do that in cycles, but that way it's just way faster. So I'm gonna rotate my sun that the shadow is gonna go in the same direction like my real shadow. If I wanna see both shadows at the same time, I do have to switch to cycles. If you don't see your actual video in the background, go on your render settings, on film, and hit transparent. Now if you want to zoom in into your camera, don't just zoom in, make sure that camera to view is not selected, so you can actually zoom in without actually moving your camera, because that would mess up your track. So now we're just gonna go down here and compare those two shadows. Are they both going in the same direction? Are they just as sharp, or is maybe my fake sunlight, maybe it's too sharp or not sharp enough? And I'm trying to compare those two things. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to match your shadows, because that is really what can sell an effect or give it away that it's fake. And not just the sharp points, when we go further away, that even is that as blurry as this. And right now, because it's perfect direct sunlight, it is perfectly adjusted, which is lucky because we don't have to adjust anything. But if we did, click on your sunlight, go into your light settings, and you can adjust your angle. The higher you go, the softer it's gonna get. Okay, that was a little too, see, you can see that it's very soft, as if there was a cloud in front of the sun or anything like that. So, but right now, this is perfect. The only real difference is that our CG shadow is very, very dark compared to the blue one. The reason for that is that we don't have any atmosphere yet. When I go to my world settings, I can see that I have a background. It's just gray. If I made this blue, crank this up, it would also brighten up my shadows. But I told you before, we're not going to use this. We're going to use an HDRI to light up the entire world, so we get more reflections and more light information. Also going to increase your render time, but for a scene like that, it is definitely worth it. So I'm going to try to find an HDRI. I have an asset library of HDRIs, which is awesome. You can see them here. I have those from Polyhaven. It's definitely recommended if you want to get lots of HDRIs and stuff like that, or even models. It's awesome. So I'm going to try to find an HDRI which kind of matches my scene, like it's a street or something urban with an asphalt, concrete, underground, but also the light has to be soft. So I can look at those little balls here and look at the shadows, like that would be good. I might use this one. I wouldn't use this one because it's green. It's too much green. We don't have that much green in our scene. That one would be okay, but the shadow is also too harsh. That one could work. Abandoned tank farm. And we have this one too. We have this one twice, once with a hard shadow, one with a soft shadow. We're going to use the soft shadow. Now it's time to dial in how much of that we actually want to see. Right now my shadow is just too transparent, so I have two options. Either I go on my sun and increase the sunlight, which I think is the right call, because when I look at my guy here, we shot it a little overexposed, so I'm gonna try to adjust it the same way that my CG character is also gonna be overexposed. And for that, I'm just gonna turn up the sun until the shadows match. Not in color. I'm gonna adjust the color in post and After Effects once the Blender scene is done, but just that it matches the brightness, more or less, because we can always adjust it. Yeah, and that already looks pretty good. If that was rendered like this and I wouldn't think there's any CG involved, I would think, okay, there's just a guy standing next to him with a different shadow, which is also an interesting effect, maybe for a horror film. I should keep that in mind. Anyways, so now it's time to not really model the street, but kind of have an outline where the street is going, so we kind of have an idea what is in the back, what is in the front. And for that, I'm going to use my ground here, hit G. Again, don't move things like this with G. Hit G, Shift Z, because then you can just move it on the Z axis. You only move it on X and Y. I'm going to rotate it, that it's looking away from us. Scale it, that it's exactly looking away from the camera. And I'm going to try to align it with some points I have here. Maybe with this line on the left, that would be smart. So I'm just going to go to tab, edit mode. I'm going to select this edge here. I'm going to go to edge selection mode and move this, go to local movement, so I can move this to the line on the left, so it's aligned here. I'm going to try to find, it goes in this mode here. Let me go to Eevee so I can see faster. I'm going to try to find a similar line on the right and align it on this side too. In the back, I'm also going to try to bring it to however long my scene is going, like here. So now I have an idea how big is my parking lot really. And of course I adjusted the scale, so I'm gonna apply the scale. So now I can start placing some cars into my parking lot here. But first I'm just gonna look at my scene in the movement if it looks like he's actually tracked properly. I see a little bit of jitter on him. You see jitter back and forth, so that means our tracking is not as perfect as it could be. But the good thing is we're not going to have any foreground objects like this. It's mostly in the background. The only thing I might do is placing maybe a tree somewhere here in the foreground. Maybe. We're going to see if that's necessary. But it's always good to layer your effects. You have a CG foreground like a tree or so, maybe a car. Then we have our real Aramis here, and then behind him, layered, having some CG cars. And then once he is perfectly rotoscoped and those cars are actually behind him, we can even have one car driving at him and maybe flip over him or something crazy like that. Oh, that'd be insane. I might do that. That'd be pretty cool. But yeah, I think this scene is gonna be awesome. You guys saw it in the intro already. I still don't know what it's gonna look like, so let's hope for the best here. So now we're just gonna go to, the frame doesn't really matter. Let's go to the very first frame because we see most. We should be done with our Michal, but I'm still gonna keep him just for scale references for the cars. And now I'm gonna use Blender Kit to import some cars, because I'm not gonna model the cars myself, because first of all, I'm lazy. Second of all, I don't know how. I'm not a modeler. I'm a VFX artist, so I'm not gonna model cars. But Blender Kit is awesome if you want free models. So let's see what they got. Car. So we definitely want this one. Just kidding, we don't want this one. The thing is, they have lots of like fancy cars, but I'm looking more like for like normal cars. Something what could be on everyday street. So definitely not this one. We can have one of those here too, but it's a little low poly. Maybe for the far background we can use this one. For the more in the foreground, and that's how you work in CG. You start with the foreground and work your way up to the background, because when you have foreground objects, you don't know how much they're going to cover. And if you start with the background, have the background super detailed, and then you have suddenly a truck right in front of it and everything behind it doesn't really matter anymore. So that's why you want to start with the foreground objects. For example, if I want a tree in the foreground, let's say bush, maybe that's better because we're very close to the ground, like this. Let's have this right here, make this a little bigger and move it close to the camera, like here. So the camera should be passing this now, and that's pretty cool. I like that, I don't mind it. Why is this thing in the middle of the street? I don't know. Can rotate it a little, maybe scale it back down so we only see the bushes, like this. Oh, that's good. So we don't really know what it is, but yeah, we're just passing this. And nobody's going to ask any questions. What is this thing doing there? It's just, we see greenery here, we see greenery here, and that makes sense, right? No, doesn't matter. Okay, cool. Because the thing is, you guys know what it looks like right in front of the camera because I showed you, but the audience doesn't know. So let's place another one here on the right, because the parking lot could be over at this point. As long as we don't see the plant reaching out of the concrete, we should be okay. It's also always cool to have like moving elements, like those actually moving. There is like animated plants like that. You could do that too instead, but it's really up to you. Okay, now it's time to play some cars. And like I said, we're gonna start with the foreground and go to the background. So we're gonna go to the widest shot. We have our Michal here, so we kind of know where the parking lot starts. And this is the edge of the parking lot, so we're gonna look for some cars. So I just saw one. Like this one should be pretty good. It looks pretty detailed, so we're just gonna place it right here. And we always want to make sure that it's gonna sitting on the ground. We don't want it to be floating. Also I like to dip it into the ground so it gives the car a little weight. Don't overdo it, just a little. And when we go in cycles, we can see that our car is very, very bright. So I might have overdone it with my sun. So I'm gonna dial the sun back, let's say 8. So one more thing, what you should do is give your ground a material, because right now it's just reflecting gray and we don't want that. What we actually want is that the ground has a material, and that's a neat move. Check this out. I'm gonna give it a new material. Into the principled BSDF, I'm gonna add a texture node, an image texture. Here I'm gonna open my video, connect this with my base color. I hold Ctrl T, give it a texture coordinate, and project it from window. So now down here you can see that our video is projected from the window we're using right now. This one doesn't really matter, this one matters, because now we get a real reflection from the ground on our concrete. And if it's too much, we're just going to go down with the specular, a little up with the roughness, so we should get real reflections on our cars. It's always good to look at references. Our car is like silver white-ish. When we look at those white cars here in the background, they're like blown out. They're like white. So we're trying to adjust that as it kind of looks the same. If this car is too perfectly clean, we can add like a roughness map. I like to do that sometimes, so I'm just gonna go at one of the roughness maps I have. Imperfection maps, can give it some scratches, like this one for example. I'll just add this to my notes here for my car, plug this in to the base roughness of my car, just to see what it actually looks like. Right now it's just completely black. I'm gonna add another ramp node, set this to box, UV projected. Okay, that's basically what my roughness looks like. Now I can just dial it in. Let's go out of cycles here, we don't need this. I'm gonna make a value node, connect this to scale. So now I can just find the scale I want, something realistic, which is not too repetitive, like that. And perfect, we're done. It's a perfect car. Just kidding, it's obviously not. It's just to give that car a few little extra imperfections. So if we plug this ramp into the base roughness, it should give us some imperfections. See, like scratches like that. And the good thing is, this entire node setup, we just can, later on when we have all of the cars, we can just copy paste it to all of the cars just to make them a little imperfect. But now it's time to animate my car a little. So the moment he lifts his arms, I got a lot of shit for that because I didn't do the timing right in my last telekinesis car lifting parking lot video, that it started too early or too soon or something like that. So this time I'm gonna do a better job. So once he starts lifting his arms, which is here, I want the cars to start lifting up. So I'm gonna have my null object here. This is my null object. This is how I can move my car. On frame 66, let's go a little earlier. I'm gonna animate my null object here. My empty, it's an empty. I always mix it up with After Effects, and After Effects is null object. So I'll go to item and hit hover over location, hit I, hover over rotation, hit I. Now I'm gonna go to the very last frame and go to the end position where I want my car to be in the very end, which is gonna be pretty far out. I want it to fly up. The problem is the car has no texture or any detail on the ground, like this one in particular. So if I rotate it like this, you could see that there is no details. So instead of that, I'll rotate it like this, rotate like this, into a rotation where we don't see the down side of the car ever. In my last video, I did that with rigid bodies, which is also an option, where it just, you actually turn off gravity and all the objects start flying at the same time. Could be an option here too, but this time I want to see if I animate it by hand, if I just have more control, because it is a little pain in the butt to do that with the rigid bodies. So I wanted to see how it works if I just do it manually this time. Let me turn off hide my ground here so I can see. So cars are, this one car is lifting. Awesome, works for me. And now I'm gonna place a few more cars, and I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm just gonna place them around the parking lot in different orientations and make sure they're not always perfectly parked, because you know, people, they don't park perfectly. So make sure to add some errors and imperfections, and let's do that real quick. And one important thing about the animation is that you want to start smoothly, so it doesn't start abruptly, so it's easing into the animation, but you don't want it to ease out. So I'm gonna grab this one, move this to the far right so it's not easing out, and the same with this one. And the next car, because it's just a little further away from our guy, I'm just gonna start the animation a little later, just a few frames, because that's gonna be a cool wave if the cars start moving the further away they are. I'm gonna hover over location, hit I, hover over rotation, hit I, go to the very last frame, lift it up, rotate this way, rotate maybe even this way, and definitely this way. Nice. That's how you get away with crime. And again, you want them to ease in, but you don't want them to ease out. So I move these ease points to the right so they're not easing out. Now when we look at it, they're starting to lift. And again, if we want to, we're just going to copy our imperfection map, go on the next car, see how this car is set up. Nothing is set into roughness, so I'm just going to copy paste it in here, plug this into roughness, and when we look at the material, we can adjust it a little. We go to our car paint, plug it into roughness, and add a few imperfections to your car. And now I'm gonna do that 1,000 of times. When you hover your cars, make sure you have a nice framing. You can see them all, because you don't want them to disappear behind other cars and whatnot, so just make sure you do that. And always randomly. You don't want to just copy paste an animation, just do it always randomly. Okay, great. I just placed all my cars. One thing It's very important what you do is once you track your camera and you think you did a good track, make sure that you go to your camera constraints. So select your camera, go on constraints, and this is your camera solver. This is what the tracker did. And what you want to do is hit constraint to F curve. That's gonna make all your camera movement, turn it into keyframes. Just like we animated those cars, it's gonna turn it into keyframes. And if you don't do that, and if your Blender crashes or you just try to open it up on a different computer, your camera track is gonna be gone. And my Blender just crashed and I had to retrack this footage. That's why that took a little longer than anticipated. So hit constraint to F curve. Now the computer is going to render for a minute, but once it's done, it's going to create keyframes. You can see them down here for the actual camera movement, and you can look at them. And the cool thing is sometimes you see a little jitter, which is not supposed to be there, and you can just delete those single keyframes, but in this particular case it looks just fine. Okay, now there's two more things I want to do. One, I want a car driving towards my protagonist, Aramis. Once he lifts his arms, the car is going to flip over him. So we're going to do that by placing one more car. Let's make it a police car. So maybe he's like some kind of criminal, superhero villain criminal. And he's going to flip a car over him. So let's take this police car. It looks very nice. Let's place it in the back of the parking lot. Turn it towards him, maybe somewhere a little further on the side so we can actually see it. Turn it towards him, and in the beginning of my video, first frame, I'm going to animate the location, let's say animate the rotation, and have him drive towards my guy. And let's say at frame 80 he's going to be like right in front of him. I'm going to move the car's location just like towards him, like not too close. I think this is a healthy distance. Animate the location, and now from here the car is just going to flip up. So we're going to go on our car, move the location up, rotate it, move it up, and maybe just out of frame. And let's hope when we make those keyframes that it's going to look good. We probably have to adjust our graph editor here and there a little so it looks smooth, because it's always hard to picture what it's going to look like. But now our car is drifting a little. See, it already started rotating in the beginning. We didn't want that. So we're going to change those keyframes to the rotation it was before towards him. And here we want the car to flip over him. So it's driving, 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 and smack, it flies up. Because I want it to flip more than move. So I'm just going to adjust those until I like the result. Okay, that's it for my police car. Now, even though I turned them off in my viewport, they're still turned on in the render. That's important, because if I render now, they're not going to be in it. Just like with my Michał here, he is visible in my viewport, but I don't want him to be visible in the render. So I'm going to turn this one off. So even though I can see him, he's not going to be in there. Okay, the next step is I'm going to duplicate my ground layer with Shift D. This one I'm going to call particle emitter. And what this one is going to do, I'm going to place all kinds of objects here, trash, leaves, that kind of stuff, which could be on the parking lot, which is not there already, like stuff like here in the background. I'm going to place it all over the parking lot, and once the telekinesis magic starts, everything is going to lift up as well. And for that we need to create some particles. So right now this is my emitter. I'm going to remove the material it has, and it shouldn't have a material because I don't want to show the actual emitter. When I go to my very first frame, I go under my particle properties, hit on plus, and now this emits particles. So when I play it, you can see lots of particles are being emitted. Okay, right now it's just halos falling off of it, but that's a great start. Now I just have to figure out how many do I actually want. Let's say 100, just for now. Frame start is going to be probably 0. Frame end, just for the emission, is going to be frame 1. So all the particles I emit are just going to emit, and then they're just going to exist, and they're not going to get more created. Okay, the lifetime though. The lifetime should be like the length of our scene, which is 288 frames. So 280 let's say 89 because we're going to start on frame 0, so 289 in my case. Now the complicated part is I obviously don't want just halos, I want something cool, and I also don't want them to drop, I want them to stay up there. So under physics, so that's why our ground here, I have to make a collision object. So under physics properties, I make it a collision, just like that. Make sure, I think I did it, but I apply the scale. Now they're just going to stay there. They're flopping around a little, but that doesn't matter. They're just staying there. Now under around frame 50, when the telekinesis is about to start, I see his hand movement. I can already slowly turn off gravity. There is a different way how to do that. We can do it with a force field, which we're going to try first. We're going to make Shift A, go to force field, a force, bring this to, I don't know where exactly. Let's get it close to our subject for now, and we're going to see how it looks. Now when we go to the first frame, we can see everything is getting pushed away from our force field, which is cool. It's a little too strong right now, so we're going to dial it back 0.1, and we can see, okay, it's happening. For now they're falling off our ground here. I know we made the ground a specific size, but we're just going to make it bigger now because we don't need this as a reference anymore. So we're just going to make our ground bigger, apply the scale, and now it's not going to drop off anymore. It's just going to get pushed away. Don't worry about this glitch here. It's only because we have two layers on top of each other and we're not going to see our particle emitter. We can turn this off when we go under particle properties, and under render we just turn off show emitter, then we're not going to see the emitter in the render. Now instead of halos, we want to have leaves and stuff like that. So let's see if we have some in the Blender kit. Leaf. So we have a few leaves in our polyhaven, so we're going to use those. But the important thing is try to get it away from our scene and definitely behind our camera, because we don't want it exactly in the shot. We just want it like somewhere here. So let's just bring this back here. Let's look at this a little closer. And now we're just going to delete whatever we don't want. Let's see how this is set up. So we're just going to go in edit mode. We're going to apply the visual transform and make instances real. Now we have lots of objects here. In object mode, we're just going to delete what we don't want. So we don't want this one, we don't want this one, I just want a few leaves. So I'm just going to delete this, select this one, go in edit mode. I'm going to select a few polygons here, plus, until I selected enough I want to delete. Do the same thing here. I select a few polygons, hold control, plus, and delete that. Okay, we don't want this either, so control, plus. Nice, delete faces. Now this is all that's left. I do not need my empty, delete this. So this is going to be one of my particles now. So I'm going to move this, I can select it, hit new collection, call it particles. So that's going to be in my particle collection now. But I don't want just leaves, I want also rocks. So let's see if we can find some rocks. In here, maybe in here. This is definitely a rock. Those are big rocks. I want something like this, something small. I want smaller rocks. I'm going to make it smaller, apply the scale so they're kind of the same size. They don't have to be like all together, but it just makes it easier. So also the rock I'm going to move into my particle collection. Now that should be enough to show the effect what I'm trying to do here. So now I'm going to go back to my particle emitter, and instead of render as halo, I want to render a collection. In the collection I want to render, guess what? It's particles. Now all the particles I had there before is going to be rocks and leaves. I'm going to adjust the scale to 1 because that's the scale I have those things to set up. And when I look at it, it's a bunch of leaves and rocks. Of course I can adjust the scale a little if I want to. For now they're all bouncy and we can adjust it very easily if we increase the damp, but not too much, just by a little, so they're still going to be moving away from my force field. In addition, I can also just make my force field stronger, 0.5, so you can see how everything is floating away from my force field, and that's pretty cool. But of course I want them to fly as well, so what I'm going to do in addition, whenever the telekinesis starts or a little before, I'm going to slowly decrease the gravity. And when everything is done, just hit render, and that's the result.
Action.
Well, just hitting render and enjoying your final work it's not that easy. You still have to set a few things up inside of Blender to be ready for the compositing in After Effects. And how to do all of that, I'm going to show you in the next video. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like it, make sure to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe if you aren't already, and see you in the next video. Doo-doo-doo.